So imagine this, your own brother screaming that you're ruining the family, your dad telling you to just disappear, and suddenly, bam, you're out. That was Claire. But here's the twist, they think they've won, totally unaware that she's been setting a trap for months. 6 months of careful planning, and now everything is about to explode right in their faces. You won't believe how it all unfolds. The betrayals, the revenge, and how she flips the script. Stick around, because this is just the beginning. The fluorescent light in the conference room was that high-pitched hum that just burrows into your skull. You know I had just finished my presentation. The final slide glowing red like a warning, a bar chart showing our cash flow nosediving, and I'm there, trying to sound calm. So, as you can see, I said, my voice steady, though my stomach was doing somersaults. If we don't enact these austerity measures immediately and freeze non-essential projects, we'll be in default in less than 30 days. Across the table, my father, Albert, sat slouched, hands folded, eyes somewhere distant. Beside him, Marcus vibrated with that furious energy only he could carry. His bespoke suit looked like it had been wrung out of water, tie loosened, jacket unbuttoned. He finally spoke. His voice like venom. Austerity measures. That's always your answer. Claire, cut, freeze, stop. You're a glorified bookkeeper trying to pilot a battleship. I swallowed, tried to keep my voice even. These aren't opinions, Marcus. These are the numbers. The Summit Project, your big coastal expansion, is a black hole. The consultants haven't produced a single viable blueprint, and it's already cost $500,000. He slammed his hand on the table, water glasses jumping. Growth costs money. You're the reason this family's falling apart. Your negativity, your constant blockades, you're stifling us. And for a moment, I couldn't speak. 10 years I had given to this company, working nights, balancing every number, sacrificing my life to keep it afloat. And here I was, being accused of ruining it. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to argue, to remind them of all I'd done. But something inside me went still. The anger. It was just gone, replaced by this hollow, silent calm. I turned to my father, voice small, almost pleading. Dad, you see the reports? You know I'm right. Albert looked up slowly, eyes dull, avoiding mine. He looked at Marcus instead, the golden boy, the visionary he'd always championed. Claire, he said, his voice gravelly. Marcus is right. You're stressing everyone out. Your negativity is poison. Maybe it's better if you disappear for a while. Take a leave of absence. Disappear. The word echoed. Disappear. Just like that, I was being erased. Not just ignored. Not just dismissed, erased. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice didn't come. My mind was a strange, detached fog, observing, almost outside my body. Marcus smirked like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. And there I sat, facing the tribunal of two people who had just condemned me. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a cold emptiness, like the air after an explosion when the dust hangs heavy and everything is silent. I closed my laptop. The click was loud in the still room. I gathered my legal pad, my pen, packed them neatly into my briefcase. Snapping the clasps shut, I stood, smoothed my skirt, walked toward the door. Claire, wait, my father called, a flicker of panic in his voice. We'll keep you on the payroll. Of course, for a while. I paused at the door, hand on the knob, turned to look at them one last time. My father, a coward. My brother, a fool. No, thank you, I said, my voice crisp, emotionless. I quit. I didn't slam the door, just gently closed it. the latch clicking like the final lock on a tomb, walking past the office, past framed photos of groundbreaking ceremonies, past the reception desk. I didn't look at anyone. The sun hit me like a blast as I stepped outside. I didn't feel relief. Not yet. I felt the weight of betrayal. The kind that doesn't just hurt, it amputates. The first 12 hours were a blur. I drove to my small, quiet apartment across town, the one I had kept modest for sanity's sake. I let myself in, dropped into the silence, and just sat. Didn't turn on the TV, didn't make dinner, just stared at the wall as the evening light crept across the carpet. My phone buzzed. Marcus, ignored. Buzzed again. My father, ignored. They thought they'd won. Let them have their victory. My limbs were stiff by the time I moved. I ran a bath, scalding hot, as I thumped. The numbness faded, replaced by this sharp, acidic grief. It wasn't just the company, it was my grandfather's legacy. My life's work, all the nights spent renegotiating contracts, massaging the banks, translating Marcus's wild ideas into real numbers, gone, disrespected. And my father, who had called me his rock, crumbled under pressure and chose Marcus over me. I lay in bed, but sleep didn't come. The hum of betrayal replayed over and over, Marcus's sneer, Dad's averted eyes, the words disappear. My phone stayed dark, except for the first frantic texts. Silence followed, except for the pulse in my head. And then, in the pre-dawn dark, my phone rang, shrill, panicked. 6:04. My father, ignored. Again. Marcus, ignored. Texts, all caps. Frantic, demanding. The bank. Accounts frozen. Come back now. Something terrible. We need you, please. A cold smile touched my lips. Not happiness, not joy. Vindication. Oh, they had no idea. They thought I was just a boring, spineless accountant. They forgot one thing. They forgot who I really was. I picked up my phone, but not for them. Susan, my lawyer, my friend. Hit dial. First ring. She answered. Calm. Steady. Perfect. It's time. I said it time for them to take the bait, to feel the consequences of their own blindness. I sat there, letting the morning light filter through the blinds, letting the calm before the storm sink in. This was the beginning, the first step, the moment after being cast out, and yet completely in control. They thought they had thrown me away. They were wrong, and I was about to prove it. I walked into my apartment and closed the door behind me, and for the first time in hours, maybe days, the silence was almost unbearable. No fluorescent hum, no arguing, no demands, just me and the faint smell of coffee from earlier. I dropped my briefcase onto the floor, but didn't unpack it. Didn't need to. I just sat there, staring at the blank wall, letting the weight of what had happened settle in. Marcus, Dad, they had really done it, Tom. They had pushed me out. And for what? To celebrate their victory over me. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Marcus, ignored. Dad, ignored. Every vibration felt like a tiny reminder that they thought they could call me back into their world. And I just couldn't. Not yet. I let them stew in their own mess. Let them have their moment of triumph, however shallow and fleeting it might be. My mind drifted, tracing the familiar patterns of grief and disbelief. I had spent a decade keeping this company alive. Nights alone, poring over spreadsheets, renegotiating contracts, smoothing relationships with the banks, all to save what Marcus had been carelessly bleeding dry. And now they acted like my work meant nothing, like I was nothing. The apartment was small, efficient, a place I had never really settled into because work had always taken priority. But tonight, it felt like a refuge. Even if it didn't bring comfort, I didn't turn on the TV, didn't make dinner, didn't even reach for a glass of wine. I just sat, letting the sun dip lower, letting the light stretch long shadows across the carpet. It was quiet, too quiet, and yet it was the first quiet I had allowed myself in years. I traced the edges of the sofa with my fingers, letting my mind wander over every slight, every dismissal, every look of triumph on Marcus's face. How had it come to this? How had I, the one keeping the company afloat, become the poison in their eyes? I thought about the first hours after leaving the office, the click of the door, the cold sun on my face, the empty streets as I drove home. The betrayal felt so absolute. It was almost physical, like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I let myself feel it now, really feel it. And with the grief came something else. Not anger, not yet, just a cold, simmering awareness, the kind that grows slowly, unnoticed at first, and then suddenly fills you completely. I thought about all the warnings I'd given, the reports I had written, the risks I had flagged. They hadn't listened. They had chosen their own delusions over reality. And that, I realized, was their mistake. I finally moved when the light had faded to gray and my limbs had stiffened from sitting too long. I ran a bath, scalding hot, letting the water fill the tub as if it could wash away the numbness. The steam curled around me as I slid in, and for a while, I let the grief and frustration wash over me. The company, my father's blindness, Marcus' arrogance, it all pressed in. Every night spent negotiating with banks. Every sleepless hour ensuring payroll ran. Every painstaking contract review. And it had all been overlooked, dismissed. And yet, I realized that the grief wasn't the end. It was the fuel. The fire I hadn't allowed myself to feel while pretending to be calm, polite, invisible. That fire had always been there. Now, it had a name. As the water cooled and I finally stepped out, I felt the first faint stirrings of determination. Not the wild, panicked kind that comes from stress, something quieter, colder, but infinitely sharper. They had pushed me away, thinking they had won. And in doing so, they had underestimated me. They had assumed I would be broken, defeated. They thought my silence meant surrender, but it didn't. It couldn't. I let the water drip from my hair onto the tile, tracing the path of what I would do next, thinking through every step, every possibility. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I didn't even pick up the phone when it buzzed again. Instead, I sat with the silence, letting it remind me that for the first time in a long time, the boardroom, the office, the spreadsheets, they were no longer cages. They were mine to observe, mine to understand, and, if I chose, mine to correct. By the time night fully fell, I had made a quiet decision. Not revenge, not yet. Strategy, patience, observation, the betrayal, the grief, the sense of being invisible. It was all part of the plan. They had given me everything I needed access, ignorance and arrogance. And now, sitting alone in my apartment, I felt the first taste of control after months of being overlooked. I let out a slow breath, feeling the tension ease just slightly, replaced by focus. The hurt would linger, sure, but it had a purpose now. It was the beginning of something far bigger than grief. I wasn't just coping. I was preparing. 10 years ago, I was on the partner track at one of the biggest accounting firms in Chicago. My condo overlooked the park, my social life was thriving, and my career was something I had meticulously built from the ground up. I was on my own terms, building a future that was mine. And then the call came. My father, Albert, voice cracking over the phone, telling me Miller and Son was on the brink. The 2008 recession had hit the construction industry like a hammer, and the company that my grandfather had built was teetering on collapse. My mother had just passed away, and Dad was lost, stumbling in grief and fear. Marcus, 28 at the time, was charming, ambitious in appearance, but reckless in reality, booking deals that never materialized, spending money we didn't have, living a life built on potential rather than results. I remember listening to my father plead, his words heavy with desperation. I can't lose the company. Claire, I need you. And in that moment, I made a choice. Not a choice to prove myself. Not even a choice to save the family's pride, but a choice to preserve something larger than my own ambitions. I sold my condo, took a 70% pay cut, and moved into a small, modest apartment across town. My life in Chicago, the apartment, the career, the friends, the future I had envisioned, it all disappeared almost overnight. The first 2 years were brutal. 90-hour weeks, endless nights at the office, dealing with banks who were skeptical, vendors who were frustrated, and consultants who didn't deliver. Every night, I stayed long after Marcus had gone out entertaining clients or attending flashy networking events. I personally balanced the books, renegotiated contracts, streamlined payroll, and built a new auditing system from scratch. Every tiny detail of the company's finances passed through my hands. I became the ballast of Miller and Son, the one holding everything steady while Marcus soared, at least in perception. The company stayed afloat, inch by inch, line by line, and my life outside the office evaporated. I remember early mornings standing in the parking lot, coffee in hand, staring at the building and thinking, this is it. This is what I chose. My phone was a tool, my apartment a crash pad, my social life a distant memory. Every action I took was deliberate, aimed at rescuing something far bigger than me, something that had been in our family for generations. I wasn't just an accountant. I was a negotiator, a planner, a fixer. Marcus, on the other hand, was always the face of the company. Investors saw him, journalists wrote about him, everyone clapped for his charm and vision. And yet, it was my strategy, my hours, my sleepless nights that made the deals feasible, the payroll possible, the loans approved. The contrast was jarring. He was celebrated, and I was expected. Taken for granted, dismissed as the boring, cautious daughter, I was invisible in the ways that mattered most. And it wasn't just the work, it was the emotional labor. I rebuilt trust with banks that had every reason to doubt us. I personally vouched for contracts, corrected mistakes Marcus made, ensured that vendors didn't walk away. Every time a project went off track, it was my late-night calculations, my painstaking revisions, my phone calls in the middle of the night that salvaged it. And every time I tried to point out the risks, the warnings, the numbers that didn't add up, I was dismissed. He's the face of the company. Claire, my father would say, patting my hand when I questioned Marcus's extravagant expenses. We need that energy. Don't stifle him. The unfairness of it cut deeper than any personal slight could. I was the one making sacrifices, shouldering responsibilities. And yet, in the eyes of the family, Marcus could do no wrong. My diligence was seen as dull, my caution mistaken for fear, my competence ignored. It was a cold, isolating realization. I was carrying a legacy on my shoulders, and everyone, including the man who taught me everything about balance sheets, who called me his rock, seemed blind to it. And yet, Despite the exhaustion, the loneliness, the endless pressure, I kept going because giving up wasn't an option. The company wasn't just a business, it was family history, a testament to the work and dreams of those who came before me. I learned to be meticulous, to anticipate errors before they happened, to build layers of checks that Marcus never saw. Every late night spent recalculating projections, renegotiating a loan, or pushing back on a reckless decision was a stitch in the fabric of survival, and slowly, painstakingly, the company started to stabilize. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Looking back now, it's clear how much I gave up. My friends drifted away, my life outside work shrank to almost nothing, and I became the invisible force holding everything together. And the worst part? The people I loved and trusted the most saw me as expendable, as someone who could be sidelined for Marcus's charisma and wild visions. That tension, that feeling of being essential yet invisible, shaped the person I became. Every warning I issued, every line item scrutinized, every painstakingly drafted report was fueled not by ambition alone, but by a sense of responsibility, and yes, by the knowledge that no one else could or would do it the way I could. It started subtly at first. Marcus brought in this new consulting group, a flashy team from out of state. They had slick websites, impressive titles, and an uncanny ability to spend our money like it was Monopoly cash. I remember walking into a meeting, seeing the projections, the transfers, the invoices, and my stomach would just sink. Something wasn't right. I went through the numbers again and again, and it hit me. There was no real work being done. Just wires going out, shell companies popping up, and promises that never materialized. I tried to talk to Marcus. We don't have the capital for this. I'd say, voice tight with frustration. The bank will never approve the loan. We can't fund operations this way. He'd just snap back, eyes gleaming, a little too pleased with himself. We don't need the bank. He'd say, we'll pre-sell. We'll use operational funds. Operational funds. My brain would almost short circuit. That was our payroll, our vendor capital. And yet, in his mind, it was all fair game. I'd go to my father with preliminary reports, showing the risk, showing the numbers that didn't make sense. I'd lay it out clearly, meticulously, hoping anyone would see reason. Albert would glance at the reports, then at Marcus, then push my work aside. Your brother's building something. Claire, he'd say, your grandfather took risks. You're cautious, like your mother. That's fine. But it's not how we build a legacy. I'd sit there, mouth dry, just staring. Legacy, really. The legacy was being stripped from under our noses, dollar by dollar. While Marcus got praise for his charm and energy, I would watch him, watch the consultants, watch the transfers, and my heart would just pound in disbelief. I kept thinking, this can't be happening. This can't be happening. And yet, it was. One evening, I dug deeper, hours at my desk, cross-referencing transactions, tracing emails, following leads, and there it was, Rhodes Global Strategies, a company that didn't exist in any meaningful way, incorporated through a shell holding, connected to a name I vaguely recognized from Marcus's college days. My coffee had gone cold on the desk as I realized the scope of it. Hundreds of thousands wired for nothing, no contracts, no deliverables, just empty promises. I couldn't breathe for a moment. This was bigger than I'd thought. And every time I tried to bring it up, every careful, documented warning I presented, my father just sighed, shook his head, and repeated the same words. We need his energy. Don't stifle him. Don't stifle him. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Here I was, trying to stop a disaster, while the disaster itself was being praised for enthusiasm. My hands would clench into fists, my teeth grinding, and yet I had to remain calm, methodical. There was no room for shouting, no room for dramatics. I had to be precise. Every number accounted for, every warning logged, every wire transfer traced. Night after night, I pored over the data. I started to see patterns, discrepancies that didn't make sense unless someone was actively diverting funds. It was deliberate. It was fraud. My frustration grew, simmering quietly beneath the surface. I felt like I was screaming in a vacuum. Nothing I said mattered to them. Marcus, for all his charisma, couldn't be trusted with a spreadsheet. And yet, he was in charge. And Dad was blind, ignoring the signs, relying on charm and instinct over evidence and reality. But as my anger grew, so did something else, determination. If no one else was going to stop this, I would document everything. I would follow every wire, save every email, every invoice, every contract or lack thereof. I would make a record so meticulous that no one could deny what had been done. And if they thought I was just the boring, cautious daughter, they were about to find out exactly how wrong they were. The contrast between Marcus's reckless charm and my quiet, unglamorous diligence had never been more stark. Every careless transfer, every fraudulent invoice, every ignored warning was a step I could use, a piece of the puzzle to turn this mess around. I felt a cold clarity, a focus that sharpened with each discovery. And even though my father continued to dismiss me, continued to champion Marcus, I knew that one day, every single detail I had recorded would matter. And when that day came, I wouldn't be ignored. I wouldn't be the invisible one any longer. I would be the one holding the truth in my hands. For 6 months, I lived a double life, though it didn't feel like one at first. Every day, I went to the office, performed my duties as usual, nodded along in meetings, answered emails, balanced the books, the whole charade. But every night, after Marcus had left with his entourage of consultants and Dad had settled into his armchair with the evening paper, I logged into my home setup. My small apartment became a war room. The dining table, cluttered with papers and spreadsheets, was the front line. I started building a shadow ledger, a duplicate set of books, meticulously documenting every wire transfer, every suspicious invoice, every time Marcus overrode a system alert, every email where I had formally warned him or my father about impending financial disasters. It was painstaking work. Every detail mattered. I downloaded copies of every fraudulent invoice from Rhodes Global Strategies shell company. I saved and timestamped every email that proved my warnings had been ignored. I cross-referenced account approvals with internal memos, noting when Dad initialed something without reading it. Every false promise, every reckless transfer, every mismanaged project became evidence. And the more I dug, the more it became a game of strategy, almost like chess. I was moving pieces silently, calculating the inevitable checkmate while they remained blissfully unaware. I remember the thrill of it, not the kind of thrill that comes from adrenaline or danger, but a sharp, cold rush, the satisfaction of seeing patterns emerge, of knowing the truth when no one else did. As I traced the flow of $500,000 to an offshore account, I leaned back in my chair, sipping lukewarm coffee, and thought, so this is what real control feels like. Marcus is out there celebrating his brilliance, and Dad is patting him on the back, and yet the entire game board is in my hands. I'm calm, deliberate, precise. They have no idea what's coming. I started to see all the threads, the way Marcus' vanity projects were funded by credit lines I had painstakingly maintained, the way vendors were being used as conduits, the way consultants delivered nothing but paperwork while siphoning cash. Every night, I would sit in the glow of my laptop, annotating every wire transfer, every budget discrepancy, every premature approval, carefully building a timeline that would speak louder than words ever could. It was methodical, surgical, almost meditative in a way. I was no longer just an accountant. I was a forensic investigator, the architect of a trap that no one would see until it snapped shut. The sense of control was intoxicating. For once, I wasn't at the mercy of their ignorance or arrogance. Every night, the shadow ledger grew, a digital fortress of truth. I could see Marcus's overconfidence like a map of vulnerabilities. The consultants, the shell companies, the bogus invoices, they were all threads I could pull when the time came. And every time I paused, leaned back, ran my hand over the spreadsheets, I thought about the irony. They believed they were caging me, that they had removed the obstacle, so they had handed me the keys to the entire kingdom and had no idea. It was almost funny in a dark, satisfying way. Susan, my lawyer, had become my silent partner in this effort. When we spoke, she would give me the occasional nod of approval, a quiet confirmation that we were on the right track. But most of the work was solo, late nights in the glow of a monitor, occasionally muttering to myself about the audacity of it all. Marcus sending $500,000 to a phantom entity, Dad approving something without reading it. They were practically inviting disaster. And I was there, ready, documenting it all, preparing every piece of evidence so that when the moment came, there could be no argument, no denial, no escape. I remember nights when the apartment was completely silent, the only sound the occasional click of my mouse and the hum of the computer. I'd pause sometimes just to imagine the day I would confront them. Their faces, their disbelief, the way Marcus' smug expression would finally falter. And in those quiet moments, I felt a strange satisfaction. Not revenge exactly, more like justice. Neat and precise, measured in lines of code and spreadsheets. I was building something permanent, something undeniable, and I had complete control. My calm stood in stark contrast to the chaos they were blissfully unaware of. Every record I saved, every copy of a questionable invoice or a mismanaged payment, I labeled, timestamped, and archived. I built backup after backup, encrypted folders inside encrypted servers, a fortress of truth that could not be challenged. I worked through weekends, through late nights when the city outside my window slept, tracing patterns, double-checking numbers, cross-referencing transfers. The thrill was not in danger, but in precision. It was the certainty that when the time came, the evidence would speak louder than any argument, louder than any pleading. At some point, the work became addictive. The more I documented, the more I understood the magnitude of the recklessness. Marcus had built a financial labyrinth, and I had the blueprint. Each night, I added new evidence, new links, new proof, feeling more in command than I ever had in a conference room full of people who refused to see the truth. My calm, methodical approach was a silent contrast to their oblivious chaos. They had no idea I was watching, recording, preparing for the inevitable collapse they were engineering themselves. And the satisfaction of that knowledge, the thrill of knowing that their arrogance had blinded them, gave me focus like nothing else ever had. By the end of the 6th month, the shadow ledger was complete. 6 months of meticulous evidence, carefully logged, time-stamped, and cross-verified. Every fraudulent transaction, every ignored warning, every manipulated report, it was all there. I leaned back in my chair, fingers interlaced, staring at the screen, and let a quiet smile form. Not a triumphant smile, not gloating, just the kind of calm, deliberate satisfaction that comes from knowing you're ready. The trap was set, the evidence undeniable, and I was in control. Marcus and Dad had thought they had thrown me out. They had no idea. And when the moment came, Every single move they made would be documented, exposed, and finally accounted for. The next morning, then my phone exploded. Texts, calls, the little red notifications flashing like alarms. 17 missed calls from Dad, 9 from Marcus, and a few from our longtime attorney. I didn't answer. Not yet. Not a single one. I could practically feel the panic radiating through each buzz, each text. The bank had frozen the accounts. Payroll was due. Vendors were probably panicking. And yet, I felt calm, strange, almost indulgent calm, because I knew this was exactly what I had been preparing for. Marcus's texts were desperate, frantic. What did you do? Pick up now in all caps, every exclamation point, a tiny spike of panic. Dad's were almost pleading. Claire, answer the phone. It's an emergency. Please, come back. And I just sat there staring at the messages, feeling the tide of power slowly shift. They thought I would rush in, like I always had. They assumed I would fix everything immediately, patch the mess, and smooth over their mistakes. They couldn't have been more wrong. I took a deep breath, leaning back in my chair, letting the early gray light filter through the blinds. My mind ran through every detail, every warning I had sent, every wire I had logged in my shadow ledger. Marcus had triggered the bank's automatic freeze himself, transferring $500,000 to a phantom offshore account. Right after I walked out, he had no idea he was walking into the trap I had spent 6 months building. And my father, he was just as blind, completely unaware that the calm, measured force they had dismissed was the only thing holding them back from total disaster. I ignored the next call, and the next. I let them stew. I let the panic build. I sipped my coffee slowly, almost lazily, feeling that quiet thrill that comes from being in control. I wasn't rushing to fix this. I wasn't going to save them. Not yet. That was the point. They needed to experience the full weight of their own incompetence. Every text, every call, every frantic attempt to reach me was like a heartbeat echoing the trap snapping closed. Not going to answer, I whispered to myself, almost like a mantra. And then I thought about Susan and how we had planned this meticulously, how every detail in the shadow ledger lined up with what the bank would see. Every fraudulent transfer, every ignored warning, it was already all undeniable. And now it was working exactly as intended. My mind drifted over the months of preparation, the nights of logging transactions, saving emails, building a record that could not be argued with. I could almost see the scene at the office, Marcus pacing, Dad floundering, realizing too late that the person they had tried to push aside was the only one capable of managing the chaos they had created. The tension in the room, the panic, the realization it was intoxicating in its own way. Not because I wanted them hurt, exactly, but because finally, the scales were tipping. The power wasn't in their hands anymore. They had built this house of cards themselves, and I was watching it wobble from a safe distance, knowing I had anticipated every wobble, every misstep. A text from Marcus came through, trembling even through the screen. The bank. They've frozen everything. Payroll. Suppliers. We need you now. I leaned back and exhaled slowly. Yes, they were finally feeling it. I let a small, almost imperceptible smile tug at my lips. Not gloating, not malicious, just a sharp, quiet satisfaction. They thought they had cornered me. They thought I was powerless. But this was the moment when I finally held all the cards. Dad's voice, frail and panicked, rang through my voicemail. Claire, you have to come down here. It's an emergency. The bank. They're saying irregularities. Please, we need you. I sat still, letting it sink in. They were in full-blown panic mode, and I was calm, deliberate, entirely in control. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had asked me to disappear, They had dismissed me as negativity, poison even, and now the only way forward was through me, but only on my terms. I picked up my coffee, swirling it in the cup. I wasn't rushing, I wasn't panicking. I was watching, waiting, letting their panic peak while I remained cool, calculating. Every frantic call, every desperate text was evidence that the plan, the trap I had set was working. I could feel the shift in power subtly, the balance tilting from them to me. Marcus and Dad had thought they were in charge. They were not. They had walked themselves right into the consequences of their own recklessness, and the full weight of it was just beginning to settle. I typed a quick note to Susan. They're panicking. It's time. And then I sat back again, sipping my coffee, calm, unshaken. The morning sun had risen fully now, spilling light across my apartment. I watched it quietly, letting the moment stretch, letting the suspense build. They were desperate, frantic, and yet utterly blind to the fact that the person they had underestimated, the person they had dismissed, was the only one holding the situation together. And now, observing them unravel with complete control. By the time we reached Susan's office, the morning had thickened with tension. The city outside seemed oblivious to the storm about to unfold within a minimalist glass-walled conference room on the 12th floor. I carried my laptop and a single thick binder, my shadowledger inside, my weapon and shield at the same time. Susan guided me to the long mahogany table, polished and reflecting the gray skyline. I took my seat, calm, collected, the way you do when you know the outcome before the players even enter the room. Marcus and Dad arrived right on time. Though neither looked like their usual selves, Marcus' hair was rumpled, suit creased, the carefully cultivated charm replaced with visible panic. Dad's face was pale, the slouch in his shoulders heavier than usual. As soon as Marcus spoke, his voice carried the brittle edge of desperation. "What is this?" "Claire, why are we at a lawyer's office? I should be at the bank fixing this." Susan's voice cut through sharply. "Please sit. Miss Miller is no longer your employee. She is here as a courtesy." They sank into the chairs reluctantly, and I let them stew a moment, letting the tension build like a low hum. Dad's voice broke first, shaky, the bank accounts, frozen, payroll, the suppliers, they're going to walk. You have to tell the bank to unfreeze it. You have to fix this. I turned my gaze toward him, calm, deliberate. I can't, Dad. He blinked and confusion flashing across his face. "What do you mean you can't? You're the only one with the passwords. I am no longer an employee. Dad, I have no authority. And frankly, I have no interest." I let the words hang, letting him absorb them. Marcus' face twitched, disbelief morphing into fury. "You can't do this. This is your family, your name. You and Marcus were the ones concerned about the family legacy yesterday." I let a small pause linger, savoring the irony. "Exactly. You're in charge. Handle it." Susan leaned in, whispering to me as I opened my laptop. "They need to see this. Let's go." I projected the shadow ledger onto the screen. The large monitor flickered to life, displaying every wire transfer, every time-stamped email, every fraudulent invoice, each meticulously documented. I spoke clearly, evenly, without emotion, letting the evidence speak. "Marcus, this is the digital record of the transfers you made. The offshore account you wired, funds to no contracts, no purchase orders, no deliverables, just money moved after Clare was instructed to disappear." Marcus' face went white. His mouth opened, closed. Then he stammered, This is impossible. She faked this. She's trying to frame me. I was building the company." Dad's brow furrowed, disbelief and dawning horror mingling. "Marcus, is this true?" Marcus just stared at me, then at Dad, eyes darting toward the door, looking for an escape that didn't exist. I clicked through the files, showing the initial geological survey I had commissioned for the Summit project, compared it to the second forged report Marcus submitted. Dad gasped, the weight of realization sinking in. I never saw the first report, he said, voice barely a whisper. I just initialed the binder. I moved on to the Shell Corporation. Rhodes Global Strategies, projecting incorporation documents, tracing ownership to Chad Peterson, Marcus's college acquaintance and nightclub promoter, $1.2 million wired over 6 months, all coded as consulting or geological surveys. I said, all unauthorized and unaccounted for. And it's not just the Summit project. I displayed invoices and transfers showing luxury purchases, personal vacations, and marketing expenses masquerading as business operations. Every click, every slide revealed a new layer. Dad's shoulders slumped further, his face falling into a mask of shock and disbelief. Marcus's initial disbelief became a sickly green hue of panic. It's not true, he whispered, voice shaking. She's lying. I turned toward him, calm but piercing. I kept the records. Every email, every wire, every misstep is documented. This is the work you thought you'd done in secret. One of the auditors, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, voice flat. Ms. Miller's logs match our internal records. All transfers originated from her home IP using two-factor authentication linked to her phone. The data is accurate. The room went silent. The trap had snapped shut. Dad turned slowly toward Marcus, the movement deliberate, heavy. Marcus, what have you done? He murmured. Marcus could only stare, the fight draining out of him, replaced with terror. You set me up, he hissed, venom lacing his words. I didn't set you up. I did my job. I kept the records you tried to hide, I said evenly, my voice carrying across the room. You wanted control. Dad, you sided with him. You told me to disappear, and now this is what you get. Marcus lunged, a last-ditch attempt to grab the laptop. I'll destroy it, he screamed. He never reached it. Susan was on her feet instantly, intercepting him with a force that shocked him into stillness. Don't you dare, she hissed. Sit down, or I will have security drag you out. Marcus froze, then sank back into his chair, defeated, as Dad's body seemed to collapse under the weight of realization. Mr. Davies from the bank entered shortly after, his face cold, professional, not a flicker of amusement or sympathy. He looked from the sobbing father to the seething son to me, calm, controlled, in command. Well, Davies said, his voice dripping with ice, this has been illuminating. Mr. Miller, he addressed Marcus, your operational costs lack contracts, and the $500,000 transfer yesterday was flagged by Treasury. Your company's assets are frozen pending a full forensic review. Dad's head shot up, pleading, this is a family matter. We can repay. Claire can fix it. I looked at him, heart cold. No, Dad, Susan stepped forward. Gentlemen, Ms. Miller has a proposal. I took over, calm, precise, presenting the reality. The company was being drained by Marcus' mismanagement. I laid out a plan to reclaim control, restructure debt, and recover the stolen funds, outlining the steps necessary to preserve the company. The room was tense, every eye on me. Marcus' face twisted from disbelief to fury to resignation as I methodically dismantled every argument he had and presented every piece of evidence. A full 6 months of documentation, irrefutable, undeniable. With each detail revealed, the power shifted further. Marcus could no longer argue, Dad could no longer protect him, and in that minimalist, sunlit office, the culmination of months of preparation, quiet planning, and careful observation came to fruition. The confrontation was over, the truth undeniable, and the outcome finally in my control. After the initial confrontation, the room was thick with tension. Marcus sat slumped, staring at the floor, his chest rising and falling with panicked breaths. Dad's face was pale, lined with exhaustion and shame. Susan and I had the evidence, the leverage, and now it was time to turn it into action. I took a deep breath, looking around the table. We need to resolve this cleanly, I said, my voice calm, deliberate. No more chaos, no more losses. Here's what happens next. Marcus tried to speak. A weak attempt to regain some ground. I can't sign anything. You can't make me. I didn't flinch. Yet you can, and you will. There are legal consequences for what you've done. Marcus, wire fraud, misappropriation of funds. It's all documented. You can either sign voluntarily, or the bank and authorities will intervene. Your choice. He swallowed hard, trembling. The arrogance, the bluster, all gone. Susan leaned in, placing the prepared documents in front of him. The pen rested there, waiting. He looked up at me, eyes full of a mixture of fury, disbelief, and fear. You planned this? Yes, I said simply. I built a record. A trap. Not for revenge, not for punishment, but to protect the company. And our family legacy. You were bleeding it dry. Dad let out a low groan, leaning back in his chair. Claire, I thought you'd fix everything. I didn't see it. I trusted him over you. I met his gaze steadily. You told me to disappear. Dad, you gave Marcus the benefit of the doubt while ignoring the evidence I presented. You chose blindness over reality. But now, we fix it together on the terms that preserve the company. Marcus hesitated, hand shaking as it hovered over the pen. This isn't fair. Susan's voice cut in, firm and unyielding. Life isn't fair, Mr. Miller, but the law, the bank, and the evidence are not negotiable. Sign, or face the consequences. Finally, with a jerky, reluctant motion, Marcus picked up the pen. Each signature, each initial, was a small act of surrender. The room seemed to exhale collectively as the first step toward resolution was completed. Susan immediately presented the next set of documents: Dad's controlling interest, the transfer of authority, a fixed pension, and chairman emeritus title with zero operational control. Dad's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the pen. I watched him carefully, understanding the gravity of what he was doing. He paused, looking between Marcus and me, eyes brimming with sorrow, and then he signed. The weight lifted, and the control shifted fully into my hands. I leaned back, letting the moment settle. It's done, I said, voice calm, precise. The company is legally and operationally under my leadership, but the work isn't done. We need to restructure the debt, liquidate non-performing assets, terminate fraudulent contracts, and recover as much misappropriated money as possible. Davies from the bank raised an eyebrow. And you are confident you can handle this? I gave a small, assured smile. I've managed these accounts for 10 years. I rebuilt trust with our banks, renegotiated every contract, and stabilized the company from the brink of collapse. I know the numbers, I know the assets, and I know the strategy. The company will survive and thrive with a firm hand and careful oversight. The bank nodded, auditors scribbling notes. Dad's shoulders slumped, relief mingling with grief. Marcus sat frozen, a cornered animal, realizing the futility of his previous arrogance. The contrast between them and me was stark. Calm, deliberate, in control versus panic, regret, and fear. I continued, detailing the immediate steps. We start by liquidating the Summit Project land at a controlled loss. We freeze and recover any remaining funds tied to Rhodes and Chad Peterson. All vanity projects are terminated. Vendors and suppliers will be reassured with clear communication and updated contracts. Payroll and operational funding will be stabilized immediately. Susan reinforced each point legally, confirming that every step was enforceable, that the transfer documents were binding, and that any violation by Marcus would trigger immediate action. Every detail was structured, leaving no room for argument. Marcus' mouth opened and closed several times, but no words emerged. Dad just sat, absorbing the reality, the consequences of past decisions, the shift in power. Finally, he looked at me, his voice small and broken. "Claire, I didn't see it. I didn't understand. I'm sorry for what I did, for what I allowed." I nodded, quietly acknowledging his words. But my focus remained on the company. It's time to rebuild. Dad, together, we ensure that the legacy continues, but safely, responsibly. The past mistakes are accounted for. Now we move forward. Marcus finally muttered, a last, bitter attempt. You think you've won, but I cut him off with a calm but firm glance. No, Marcus, this isn't about winning. This is about saving what's ours. The company isn't yours to gamble with anymore. The trust is gone. The control is here. It's simple. Sign, and the company survives. Refuse, and you face legal consequences. The choice is yours. He sat frozen. The last shred of bravado evaporated. He signed, initialed the confession documents, and leaned back. Defeated, Dad, quiet, reflective, had signed as well. The room was still, heavy with tension, but the pivot of power had been completed. The company's future rested in my hands, legally and operationally. The relief was palpable, even for Dad, though tinged with the bitter knowledge of consequences endured. I closed the binder, snapped the clasps, and gathered the laptop. The work of execution was over. The work of rebuilding had just begun. "It's done," I said softly, almost to myself. "Now, we save the company." Susan gathered the documents, filing them securely, while I watched Marcus exit the office quietly, defeated and defeatedly silent, the echo of his arrogance lingering in the space he left behind. Dad remained, seated, absorbing the reality, and I approached him. "We have the company, Dad, and now we rebuild it, correctly, step by step." His eyes met mine, a mixture of sorrow, relief, and recognition. He nodded slowly, wordlessly conceding the authority and the responsibility I had earned. The shift was complete. The company was in safe hands, and finally, after years of carrying it on invisible shoulders, I was the one steering the ship. In the end, Claire didn't just save Miller Construction, she saved herself. Marcus was gone, the fraudulent schemes exposed, and her father finally saw the strength and wisdom he'd overlooked for years. She rebuilt the company, earning trust, respect, and a renewed sense of purpose. It was a triumph born of patience, strategy, and courage. So, where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and share your thoughts. And if you want to see more stories like this, consider subscribing. It's going to be worth it.